All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on cargo opportunities out of the Port of San Diego. My name is Lucas Coleman. I'm the director of World Trade Center San Diego, and we're putting this webinar on in partnership with our port. Before we get started, a little bit about our organization. There are World Trade Centers that exist all around the world, more than 300 in fact. But here in San Diego, the license is owned by the Port of San Diego, as well as the City of San Diego and the San Diego Airport Authority. And we contract through those organizations. It's the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation, or the EDC, which executes the work on behalf of those three organizations. Move up to the next slide, please. And our organization is really working with those entities to ensure that our region is globally competitive and that we're maximizing economic prosperity. Next slide, please. I mentioned we're part of the San Diego Regional EDC. We function as an independently funded nonprofit economic development organization. About 150 of the largest companies and institutions in San Diego invest in us as members to carry out this work. We're about 80% funded by the private sector, which allows us to be really responsive to the needs of the business community. And of course, that other 20% is going to be the public institutions that really impact trade in a significant way. Next slide, please. Within our organization, we carry out a lot of services which work one-on-one with businesses. A few of those that I'll call out, we help companies coming to San Diego with stuff like site selection and incentive support. On the import-export side, we do some consulting with our partners around setting up the right supply chain. We provide market intelligence to companies and workforce solutions. All that's to say, we work with dozens and hundreds of companies each year here in our region and provide you with good information to be able to execute your business plans successfully. Next slide, please. For my team, we really focus on three things. One is working with San Diego companies to help them access the international marketplace. We do that primarily through our MetroConnect Export Accelerator. Companies that feel that they're export ready and in a variety of industries can work with us. We put out an application once every year to businesses here in San Diego. And as part of that program, we provide a cash grants, discounts on airlines, complimentary translation software, and an export curriculum to really help those companies scale their international business. Even if you don't make it into that program, we still provide one-on-one consulting to lots of companies here as well. The other two pillars of our work are stewarding foreign investment projects for multinationals overseas, and finally, enhancing San Diego's global connections and our global brand. We do that through work with the airport to get more direct flights into and out of San Diego, and leading trade missions with our business leaders. Folks like Greg over at the port went with us to Seoul, South Korea last year. We'll be going to Singapore this year to strengthen those business connections. Next slide, please. Before I go and pass things off to the port, I mentioned that some of the work that we do is around research and equipping companies with good data to make business decisions. For the San Diego region, when we talk about the foreign investment stock here in the region, I thought it'd be interesting to share some of the data. These are the markets where we see a lot of foreign investment from, a lot of Western Europe and East Asia, particularly when you think about, next slide, please, a lot of the investment coming in industries like the life sciences, satellite and wireless communications, clean tech. And over the past 10 years, or 20 years rather, the trends really show Western Europe and East Asia coming to the forefront. But you also see places like Ireland and Canada represented as well. Next slide, please. Finally, the innovation drivers for San Diego from an export perspective. We see a lot of aerospace, life sciences, pharmaceuticals, and medical device as well. And so for companies that are exporting those goods, you may want to consider applying for a program like MetroConnect and just reaching out with us generally to support you with your exports. And finally, today, with this webinar on the new cranes available at the Port of San Diego, it'll open up the possibilities in areas like clean tech as we look at wind turbines, batteries, and other sorts of goods. And so with that, I'll conclude here. And from here, I'll pass it over to Greg Borisay at the Port of San Diego to carry on with this webinar. Thank you.
Lucas, thank you very much. Wanted to introduce our team here from the Port of San Diego. I'm joined by our Senior Trade Manager, Miguel Reyes, and joined by our Trade Representative, Bianca Guzman. We're really wanting to provide an update to the inland locations within the southwest part of the United States. Some very important information about the acquisition that the port has recently made to purchase 2 new all-electric mobile harbor cranes. This is an important investment because it puts San Diego in a position to begin to handle specific types of cargo to your regions that really has not been possible before, and also will allow us to enter into the retail container business in a way that the Port of San Diego has not been able to before. So with that, we'll talk a little bit into detail about these cranes and some other business that we have developing here at the Port of San Diego. Next slide, please. So a little background on the 2 cranes. They're on the terminal and working here at our 10th Avenue Marine Terminal at this time. They're the first all-electric mobile harbor cranes in North America. So all electric means no diesel assist, completely electric, 100% clean and green. It is a first for North America. These 2 cranes replace a 30-year-old diesel mobile harbor crane, which was the largest emitting piece of equipment in terms of diesel, particulate, et cetera, greenhouse gas. And so really it's a win from the environmental standpoint, but it's also a significant impact in that it allows us to lift much more capacity. The old crane would max out at roughly 95, 96 metric tons. Each of these cranes can lift 200 metric tons. Working together, they have a lift capacity of 400 metric tons or less, depending upon the lift over the vessel itself. So the cranes, as I mentioned, were delivered in July of 2023. Both cranes are now operational, and actually we're going to be having a celebration on our terminal sometime in July or August to mark the initiation of the cranes. Next slide. And to hopefully put this into context a bit and help folks understand what the Port of San Diego is trying to do with clean freight movement and striving towards zero emissions, we have a number of initiatives. We have an all-electric tug, which was just christened on San Diego Bay this week. That's the E-Wolf, which is a Crowley San Diego joint investment. We have shore power on many of our vessels, including the cruise vessels and our container service for Dole. The 2 cranes that we're talking about today are now operational. We've been early adopters in all of these areas. We're presently in the process of converting all of our yard equipment, basically forklifts, side picks, top handlers, all of that over the next few years will be converted to an all-electric model as opposed to particulate diesel. And then the last piece, and probably the most challenging, is zero emissions for truck movement in and out of the terminals. So the Port of San Diego is committed to being an early adopter. We're also committed to doing this in a commercially viable way for our business entities. And we're going to be looking to projects in states like Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and New Mexico to support the use of this new infrastructure that's being put into place. Next slide. So to talk a little bit about some of the types of cargo that we see that these cranes can be used for, obviously the top left is container business. We've seen quite a bit of 53-foot container new build. Those are the domestic containers that you see on the interstates moving across the top. We see a use for these cranes for tandem picks, for the long towers, for the windmills. Another picture at night, tower discharging. Bottom left, you see the nacelles that are parts of the cranes that are both for onshore and offshore, and then of course blades and other project cargo. So These are the types of cargoes we'd like folks to think about in terms of opportunities here at the Port of San Diego, in particular for states like Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. As you look at the large wind power, solar, and geothermal projects, we think this is an area where we can provide some real value-added service. Next slide. Quick snapshot of our terminal. This is 10th Avenue Marine Terminal on San Diego Bay. It's right in the heart of San Diego Bay, very close to the ballpark where the Padres play. It's also not particularly large. It's only 97 acres. And as you can see from the coloring and the footprint here, about half of it is dedicated to refrigerated container cargoes, as well as cold storage. We have another section for dry bulk shown in purple color. And then right on the center of the berth, shown in green, is the break bulk area, which really is the project cargo that we're talking about today. We're also going to redo our gate, a centralized gate with access to the BNSF Railroad, and better truck access in and out of the facility is part of the infrastructure improvement that we're also doing. Next slide. And with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Miguel Reyes, who will talk about the connectivity to the heartland.
No, thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. Again, Miguel Reyes, Business Development Manager with the Port of San Diego. Connectivity is really important to connect our cargo terminals to the different markets across the United States, specifically the Southwest. We're pretty well connected with California, other northern ports from San Diego, and the five. Also, we're connected to Arizona through the I-10, and more importantly, through the I-15 as we reach other destinations east of San Diego and east of the state of California. Next one, please. What you see on the slide are blades. This particular move was made about 3 years ago for Vestas, a major wind energy producer based out of Europe. These particular blades were almost 70 meters in length. So with that, you need specialized equipment and specialized companies that are able to provide the resources for the movement of these particular cargoes. We have pretty good relationships with specialized trucking companies that have served our facilities in the past here, specifically at the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal. And you can see some of the names that of the trucking companies that have used our infrastructure and facilities, like Bragg Heavy Lift, BST, Contractors Cargoes, and others. Again, these particular companies specialize in the movement of large pieces of cargo and also heavy components from our terminals. Next one, please. In a lot of cases, customers prefer to use a rail option to move their cargoes from our cargo terminals to different destinations in the Southwest, specifically when it comes to the movement of heavy pieces of cargo, over 200 tons, over 300 tons. So with that in mind, we work with our partners at BNSF Rail to use the network as we move these cargoes from our marine terminals. In most cases, we move automobiles coming from different markets across the globe, including Asia, Europe, and even Mexico. But as Greg was stating in his presentation, we also specialize in the movement of project cargoes or heavy pieces of components. So with that in mind, again, some of our customers prefer to use the rail options that we have in our cargo terminals. We also have the option to work with UP as well, as they interchange their network with BN. So basically, you know, we have a pretty well developed rail infrastructure when it comes to the movement of heavy pieces of cargo through the rail network in the Southwest US. Next one, please. Also, another tool that we have here in the Port of San Diego is the ability to use our FTZ designation, or foreign trade zone. That was created back in 2021 with the whole purpose of deferring duties or reduced duties that some companies can take advantage of. In a lot of cases, you have companies that are looking to use this particular designation again to defer duties and to reduce other import, fees that they may have to pay. So again, with that in mind, we created or activated the foreign trade zone here at the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal. And you have the option to use our FTC designation on outside areas and also in warehouse or covered space areas. Next one, please. And with that, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Bianca Guzman.
Thank you, Miguel. I am going to be informing you of a bit more about the cargo and the trade that goes on in the Port of San Diego. So we do some trade with the European markets. We do a lot of inbound cargo that goes through, and some of that is listed here. We do some automobiles from the Volkswagen Group, some steel products that come in from Germany and Belgium. We have yachts that flow through, fertilizer from Yara, and we also bring in machinery and wind and energy components. From there, we can go on to our next slide. We also do some trade in the Asian markets. Some of that is going to be listed here. One difference is that we do inbound and we also have outbound cargo. We have heavy lift capacity with our new cranes that Greg mentioned earlier in this presentation. We also have a good mixed portfolio of cargo that flows through. So we do have automobiles coming in from different areas. We have machinery, project cargo, steel products as well, ship engines, just to name a few. And we also do some container movements, but we do a couple of other cargoes as well. So it's not just containers from there. And our next slide. We also do some trade in the Latin American markets. We have primarily Dole and Zuckermex that we work with, and they bring in we get a lot of inbound items such as bananas, fresh fruits like pineapple, perishables such as flowers, and seafood such as frozen shrimp and frozen seafood. We do that through our refrigerated, containerized items, which is a weekly service that we have here at the Port of San Diego. We also bring in bulk sugar that comes from southern Mexico, from Brazil, and Central America, which comes in every other month. We also have some items that go outbound, such as plastics and cardboard, seasonal fruit such as apples and pears, and we also have a couple of non-containerized items like soda ash, machinery, project cargo, and wind energy components, to name a few. We can go to our next slide. And I believe that would be it. Thank you for listening in to our presentation. I don't know if we have any questions in the comments or in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, we would love to get those answers to you.
And in closing, I think what we would at the Port of San Diego like to offer all the EDC groups within your respective regions is the opportunity to engage when you have projects, engage when you have trips or outreach here to San Diego. Please feel welcome to reach out to us. You have our contact information here. And we're particularly good at solving logistics problems and helping particular customers come up with resolutions to those supply chain issues. We don't have as many restrictions in terms of the type of cargo we can handle that perhaps the ports of LA and Long Beach have. So we feel that we are in a good spot to take on some of that new development work that's taking place in each of your states. So please do feel free to reach out to us. And thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Miguel.
Great. Now, if there are any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And maybe I'll kind of start off the conversation right now with a question to you, Greg. We see a lot of kind of federal legislation right now, particularly through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a green bill to try and incentivize some of this sort of activity. Do you see particular opportunities when it comes to stuff like offshore wind and the possibilities at the Port of San Diego for some of that development to happen, or perhaps from some of that coming inland and then being shipped out from San Diego? Could you kind of speak to that a little bit?
So the offshore wind area is one that we absolutely have been looking at, Lucas, and our team's been to Scandinavia twice now in 2 years to learn a little bit about what the Norwegians, the Danes are doing in this space. And there's certainly going to be a role that the Port of San Diego and the greater San Diego maritime industry plays in this. We have NASCO here. They are one of the major ship builders on the West Coast. We have BAE. They have the opportunity to dry dock, as well as tug and barge services, and these two heavy cranes. So certainly as the California offshore wind projects develop, there'll be cargo that needs to come in from the heartland to be processed, to be manufactured, and then to be shipped out. Conversely, and Bianca mentioned this, on the import side, a good amount of this cargo that is coming in, transformers, as well as the other support equipment for the large projects, needs to come in break bulk. It does not come in containers. And so we see a particular opportunity with Arizona, with Nevada, and more so with Utah, not to compete with the trans-Pacific container business, but to focus with laser-like intent on those projects and the large pieces that are required for those.
And one more question before maybe we open it up is, I know we've talked in the past about sort of that M5, the potential for a barge service. How do you see the Port of San Diego potentially fitting in and collaborating with other ports along the West Coast and kind of a cohesive supply chain that goes to East Asia?
Well, the M5 project is in its second stage of receiving bids from the barge providers. And while I can't talk too much about that process, I can say we have received a number of bids, and we're expecting to at least qualify one or perhaps two barge operators. Now, initially, the M5 would be southbound lumber from the Pacific Northwest and probably empty containers repositioned back up to the PNW from San Diego. But Bellingham is on board. We've had a couple of Oregon ports that want to jump on board. So we hope to run a pilot by this fall. That's our intent. Once the milk run is established, if you will, then there's a whole host of cargo opportunities that can jump on board. But that's a very interesting project, Lucas. Not only does it take a lot of trucks off the I-5, but it also opens up another gateway for some of these smaller ports that don't have easy access to the big ports.
And do you feel like and you brought up a good point about taking some trucks off the road, and California in particular has some legislation around zero emission vehicles for trucking.
Yep.
Do you think that will be kind of a force pushing more folks to use stuff like a barge service through the Port of San Diego?
Short answer is yes. Caltrans in California is a sponsor. So far, they haven't ponied up with any money on the M5 barge service, but we think they will once it's running. And WashDOT up in Washington State is also on board, as well as two senators in both states. Again, I mentioned we're still working on a little more support in Oregon, but a lot of the coastal lumber does come out of Oregon, so we expect them to jump on board once it gets going as well. But yes, it is going to get support not only from legislation about trucks, but also because just the pricing for the trucking. And, while rail is a good option, as Miguel mentioned, it's a great option for us east-west, but north-south rail on the US West Coast is always a little dicey. There are a lot of interchanges.
Before I guess we open it up one more time, if you have a final kind of a last word that you'd like to get a message across to the people attending this and those who will watch the recording of it, do you have anything you'd like to conclude with?
I think I'd just like to conclude with the fact that the Port of San Diego is really investing in a green future. We're mindful of the need to stay commercially viable, and we're prepared for not only supply chain backlogs that may come in the future, but also for developing a robust opportunity for many customers who need a solution that's not specifically containerized.
Right. Thank you, Greg. And Sophia, are you seeing anything in the chat? Looks like we have one question here. All right, I'll go ahead and read this one question. So, anonymous attendee said, can you expand on how the newly acquired electric cranes position San Diego as a better port option for businesses than the other large West Coast ports?
Do you want to take that one, Miguel, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, that's fine. In our space, as a niche port, breakbulk project cargos, the ability to lift, cargos over 200 tons is a big deal. I think at least in California, you're not gonna find another port that is gonna be able to do that. The crane that we had before, as Greg mentioned, only had the capacity to lift up to 100 tons. And then with the two new cranes, electric cranes that we have, we can do tandem lifts, depending on the radius of the cargo, up to 400 tons of cargo. So that's a big, big deal. So that is going to be able to market the port not only to existing customers and markets, but to new ones as well. So again, that's another option that customers are going to have in Southern California. And if I may comment, in a lot of cases, people overseas think of coming to California, to LA and Long Beach, because that's the only thing that they know, right? And so, for the past few years, we've been traveling across the globe, basically telling the different customers around the globe that there are, or there is another option south of the LA basin. So in some cases, it makes a lot of sense. So our niche or our targets are to go after those particular cargos and customers that are going to be in need of using the lifting capacity that we now have.
I would add to that, and this is just a very pragmatic example. Let's say you had a 220 metric ton transformer that needed to go to Provo, Utah, and it wants to move on the railroad. Yeah, you could get it off the ship in the port of LA, Long Beach, but what they're going to tell you is you got to truck it to West Colton from LA, Long Beach, to get it on the UP Railroad to go to Salt Lake City to then deliver to Provo. Whereas here, with the interchange opportunity that Miguel mentioned, that same piece can come off the ship, get on the rail here at our terminal, move entirely by rail, and then at West Colton, it's a handoff from the BN to the UP. So it minimizes the handling, and anyone in transportation knows the more you handle the cargo and rehandle the cargo, the more expensive it is. So that's a value proposition, for instance, for Northern Utah.
And this is just segueing off of that last question, just adding on, I know you both mentioned besides heavy lift and obviously less handling, you mentioned there's not as many restrictions at the Port of San Diego than there are at LA Long Beach. Can you touch on more specific examples of those, or is it mainly just the heavy lift and the less handling?
Well, we work within the same regulatory environment So that part of it is the same, both in terms of federal and state regulations, but we have a little more flexibility at our two terminals. The terminal that we spoke about here today is run by the Port of San Diego. We're an operating port, and the model that's primarily implemented to our north in LA Long Beach is that the port leases out specific terminals, or the ports lease out specific terminals to private sector parties. And then those private sector parties can decide whether they want to handle a particular type of business or not. So I think we have more flexibility in that we can take in opportunities and really look at them, not only from, you know, what's the most profitable thing for the Port of San Diego, but also what's the right thing for the region, what value add can we provide. Miguel, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Also, you have to do with the expertise that we have developed throughout the years.
Yeah.
When it comes to labor, stevedoring companies, our infrastructure, the fact that we have modernized our terminal in the last 5 years so that you have open laydown areas that are suitable for this type of cargoes that we're targeting, the heavy lifts and the long pieces of machinery of cargo. Yeah.
I know we have representation on the call as participants, the Greater Yuma Economic Development Corporation, as well as the Economic Collaborative of Northern Arizona. And so I'm just thinking in terms of Arizona, we've seen some investment for fabs, for the semiconductor industry, and for the battery industry as well, as we see this move towards electrification. Do you at the Port of San Diego see particular opportunities for our economic development partners in the state of Arizona moving forward?
So I can take that one, Lucas. And that's the right timing. As of now, we're handling lithium batteries coming from Vietnam, bound to a solar farm in Arizona. And that is to augment their storage capacity, right? So we started this particular project last year, and it's continuing in 2024. And there are other projects as well that are going to be coming in the pipeline. And so there are, various projects that we're targeting, but one of them, again, it's lithium batteries coming from Vietnam. And potentially there could be coming from other sources like Korea and China in the future.
And one of our colleagues who's not here today, Connie Lefevre, has spent quite a bit of time working with the various truckers who were listed on the presentation to determine and confirm that the I-8 is a viable access point for many of these moves. So for the folks in Yuma, in particular, South and Southwest Arizona, we have the capability to avoid the LA Long Beach traffic and interstate mess that we're all familiar with. So you're a straight shot out the 8 freeway from San Diego to Arizona. So we feel that's a benefit as well, because for anyone who's driven it, once you get east of El Cajon, there's not a lot of traffic on the 8.
And for our part, we've had meetings and events, trade missions that we've led to places like Korea. I mentioned Singapore earlier. We've also met with Vietnam quite a few times in the past years. So particularly for East and Southeast Asia, we certainly see opportunities in those industries to work with our inland partners. On the question side, it looks like we have one more open question at the moment. They ask, does the Port of San Diego offer any incentive or support programs for organizations that choose to relocate operations from a different port to the San Diego port?
I can take that one. I think the port is very creative about leaseholds, very creative about investment when it comes to on terminal. We have only so much land that's on tidelands, but we work closely with the city and we work closely with the member cities around San Diego Bay to offer incentives. So both in terms of leaseholds for property and also incentives in terms of the kind of cargo that might be moved, we can work on that. It just depends upon an individual the metrics of a particular individual customer, but those are dialogues that we have had and can continue to have.
Right. And the questions keep streaming in. We got one more. An attendee asks, will anyone from the Port of San Diego team be at Semicon West trade show?
Semicon West.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular event, Lucas. What about you, Greg?
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
We certainly have the bandwidth to get to, and we get to a number of trade shows every year. I'm not familiar with that one specifically, but if we can find out what the details are, we certainly can look at working that into our schedule.
Yeah, and that actually might be a question for my team as well. We don't plan on sending anyone up to San Francisco. That's the trade show looks like is also a couple weeks away. So likely we won't, but there will be companies within our network. Like I said before, the EDC and my team at the World Trade Center, we're funded by about 150 or so of the largest companies in the San Diego region, including companies like Qualcomm and others that are involved in the semiconductor space. So we can do some outreach to our partners that do attend. But for our team, we don't have any plans to be going to Semicon West in the next few weeks. I think that's all in terms of the questions I see. Again, for the attendees of this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us after. Sophia will send out a recap email with the presentation. We'll also send out the recording. We'd love to continue the conversation. For particular projects, if you have questions about the viability of those, please feel free to reach out to Greg and his team directly as well.